The real reason. The Celtics traded Jaylen Brown, just got exposed. Three things just happened in the span of 24 hours that Boston fans cannot ignore. One insider just revealed the actual moment that convinced the Celtics front office to blow up a core that won a championship. One list just called the guy Boston got back in that trade one of the most overpaid players in the entire NBA. And in Philadelphia, the man Boston let go just did something that's going to sting a lot of Celtics fans watching from home. Three stories, one gut check afternoon for this franchise. Let's get into it. The domino nobody talked about. For weeks, the story around Boston has been simple. The Celtics traded Jaylen Brown to the 76ers for Paul George and draft capital, and everyone moved on to the next headline. But what if that's not actually why it happened? What if there was one specific moment in one specific series that quietly sealed Brown's fate in Boston? According to a report out August 9th, NBA analyst Gary Washburn pointed directly at Boston's first-round exit against Philadelphia as the actual turning point. Not the whole season, not a slow accumulation of frustration. One stretch in one series where the front office watched something happen and made up its mind. Here's the backdrop. Jason Tatum spent almost the entire season recovering from a ruptured Achilles. He appeared in only a handful of regular season games. That meant the burden of carrying Boston fell almost entirely on Jaylen Brown. And by every measure, he answered the call. Brown posted a career-best scoring average and finished top 6 in MVP voting, while essentially operating as this team's number one option, night after night, without his co-star next to him. Then the playoffs hit. Tatum was still out. Brown was still doing everything. And in Game 7 against Philadelphia, he put up 33 points, 9 rebounds, and 4 assists. By any reasonable definition, a superstar performance in an elimination game. And Boston still lost. Joel Embiid and Tyrese Maxey were simply too much. That's where this gets interesting, because according to Washburn's account, it wasn't really about Brown's play at all. It was about what that loss represented. Watching their team get bounced in the first round, with their best available player playing at an MVP level, and it still not being enough, apparently changed how the front office viewed the team's short-term ceiling with this specific core intact. Now, here's the part Celtics fans need to sit with. If that's true, then this trade wasn't really a referendum on Jaylen Brown's talent, his effort, or his fit next to Tatum long-term. It was a reaction to one brutal week of playoff basketball, where Boston's shorthanded roster ran into a hot Philadelphia team and lost. That's a very different story than we decided Brown wasn't part of our future. That's, we panicked after a first-round exit and decided somebody had to go. And let's be honest about what's confirmed here and what isn't. What's confirmed is the trade itself. Brown is officially a member of the Philadelphia 76ers, and Boston received Paul George along with draft compensation. What's still speculation is the internal reasoning. Washburn's account is one analyst's read on the front office's thinking, not a direct on-record explanation from Brad Stevens himself. Stevens has publicly framed the move in more general terms, without confirming this exact version of events. So treat this as a credible, well-sourced theory, not a confirmed inside quote from ownership. But even as a theory, it raises a massive question for how Boston fans should feel about this offseason. Because if a single playoff series is enough to convince a front office to trade a finals MVP, what does that say about how quickly this new roster, built around Paul George, will be judged if it struggles early? There's another layer here too. Tatum wasn't on the floor for that Game 7. He wasn't the one who had to try to match Embiid and Maxey with a diminished supporting cast. Brown was. And if the front office's patience ran out watching Brown lose a series he was largely carrying alone, that's worth remembering the next time Tatum, who is still working his way back from a serious injury, has a rough stretch of his own. So here's the real question hanging over this entire offseason. Did Boston make a basketball decision, or did they make an emotional one in the aftermath of a gutting first-round exit? Because those are two very different explanations for why a 10-year Celtic, a finals MVP, is now wearing a 76ers jersey. And that question is about to get a lot more complicated because of what's happening with the player Boston got back in that deal, the return that's already under fire. If the Jaylen Brown trade was supposed to feel like a win for Boston, this next story is not going to help. Because before Paul George has played a single regular season minute in a Celtics uniform, he's already being called one of the worst contracts in basketball. On August 9th, a report out of the Sporting News, citing Bleacher Report's Grant Hughes, named Paul George one of the most overpaid forwards in the entire NBA. And the reasoning isn't really about talent, it's about something much harder to fix: availability. Here's what the report lays out. George has played more than 60 games in a season exactly once over the last 7 years. He's topped 56 games just one time since the 2018-19 season. He's entering his 17th NBA season, and he's still owed 2 years and more than $110 million on his current deal. The trend, as Hughes put it, is headed in one direction: down, both in terms of production and in terms of simply being on the floor. Now let's slow down and think about what this actually means for Boston. This isn't a report questioning whether George can still play at a high level when healthy. It's questioning whether he'll be healthy often enough for it to matter. And for a Celtics team that just spent an entire season without its best player due to injury, that is exactly the kind of red flag that should make fans nervous. Think about the roster construction here. Boston already knows what it's like to lose a superstar to a long-term injury. Now they've added a second star on a massive contract, with a documented recent history of missing extended stretches of the season. If George's availability continues the pattern from recent years, Boston could be looking at a roster where two of its top options are more often watching from the sideline than on the court together. However, there's another side to this that's important to mention. Availability concerns don't erase what George can be when he is healthy. This is still a player capable of all-NBA level two-way production. If Boston gets even 60 solid productive games out of him, especially alongside a recovering Tatum, that combination could be genuinely dangerous in the East. The concern isn't his ceiling, it's how often Boston actually gets to see it. There's also a salary cap piece worth understanding here. A contract of this size, on a player whose track record includes multiple seasons under 50 games played, limits Boston's financial flexibility if things don't work out. It's a real risk the front office is carrying, on top of the basketball risk of racing the clock, while George ages into his late 30s over the life of this deal. So here's the uncomfortable question Celtics fans have to ask themselves. Boston traded a durable top-6 MVP vote-getter who almost never missed time for a player many analysts view as an injury risk on a massive expiring commitment. If George can't stay on the floor, this isn't just a disappointing outcome, it's the exact scenario that could validate every worry about this trade from day one. And that brings us to the part of this story that's going to be the hardest for a lot of Celtics fans to watch, because while Boston is dealing with all of this uncertainty, the guy they let go is thriving somewhere else. He's already winning Philadelphia over. This last story isn't about a trade rumor or a stat. It's about something that hits differently for Celtics fans, watching Jaylen Brown look completely comfortable in a 76ers jersey. On August 9th, SI.com's coverage of Brown's introductory press conference in Philadelphia painted a picture of a player who isn't just adjusting to a new team, he's already leaning into being part of the city itself. Brown reportedly held part of his introduction at a local community rec center rather than a typical corporate setting, talking about wanting to be rooted in the Philadelphia community, not just show up as a basketball player passing through. Before we move on, there's one important detail you need to know here. This isn't just a soundbite for a press conference. Brown has a long track record in Boston of investing in community work, education initiatives, and off-court projects. This is consistent with who he's been throughout his career. The difference now is that all of that energy is being redirected toward Philadelphia instead of Boston. And for a fan base that watched Brown build those relationships in their city for a decade, that's a tough thing to see transfer somewhere else, especially to a direct conference rival. So why does this matter for Boston beyond the emotional angle? Because how a player settles into a new situation often says a lot about how quickly he'll be productive on the court. A player who's comfortable, embraced by his new fan base, and mentally locked in tends to hit the ground running faster than one who's still processing a difficult exit. And Brown, by all accounts, appears to be doing exactly that in Philadelphia. That's a problem for Boston on two levels. First, the basketball level. A comfortable, motivated Jaylen Brown lining up twice a year against his former team is a genuinely difficult matchup, and he'll have every reason to bring extra intensity into those games. Second, the perception level. Every positive story out of Philadelphia is going to reignite the exact same questions Celtics fans have been asking since the trade happened. Did Boston let go of a genuinely great teammate and community pillar during a moment of panic, right as the rest of the roster is still trying to figure itself out? What should Celtics fans watch for from here? Keep an eye on how Brown performs early in the season once things become official, and watch how the fit around LeBron James and the rest of that Philadelphia roster comes together. If Brown looks like the same MVP caliber player who carried Boston through an injury-riddled season, that Paul George overpaid conversation from earlier in this video is going to get even louder. So let's put all three of these together. One report suggests the Jaylen Brown trade may have been less about a long-term evaluation and more about a reaction to one brutal playoff loss. Another report is already questioning whether the centerpiece return, Paul George, is worth the money and the risk. And in Philadelphia, Brown himself is showing every sign of settling in quickly, personally and professionally, in a city that's now a direct threat to Boston in the East. None of this means the trade is a disaster. Paul George could stay healthy. This new-look Celtics roster could genuinely compete. But right now, with the information we have from just the last day of reporting, there are more questions here than answers, and Boston fans deserve to go into this season with their eyes open. So here's what I want to know from you. Which of these three developments worries you the most as a Celtics fan? The reasoning behind the trade, Paul George's durability, or watching Jaylen Brown thrive in Philadelphia? Drop it in the comments. I want to see where this fan base actually stands right now. If you're a Celtics fan, make sure you're subscribed to Celtics Daily Hub, because we'll keep you updated the second the next major Boston development drops.